Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that your entire personal history is still sitting inside your mind. Not just your childhood, not just your wedding, your first day at school, or the day you got your first phone. You can remember ordinary Tuesdays from years ago, what day of the week they were, where you were, what happened, and sometimes even tiny details that everyone else completely forgot. For most people, memory fades into a blur. But for a very small number of people, the past can feel almost impossible to escape. This rare ability is called Highly Superior Autobiographical Memory, or HSAM. You may also hear the older term hyperthymesia. And the strange part is that HSAM is not simply having a bigger memory. It is something much more specific. Your autobiographical memory is the system that stores and retrieves information about your own life, your first school, your family holidays, the argument you had 3 years ago, the exact day something important happened. Most people remember important personal events reasonably well, but the details become less clear as time passes. With HSAM, that pattern can be dramatically different. A person with HSAM may be able to hear a date and immediately connect it with events from their own life, not because they memorized a calendar, not because they use a complicated memory trick. The memories can arrive automatically. So what would it actually feel like to live with a memory like that? And is HSAM really a perfect memory? The story begins with a woman known in scientific literature as AJ. In 2006, Elizabeth Parker, Larry Cahill, and James McGaugh published a detailed case study of AJ, describing an extraordinary ability to remember her personal past. The researchers reported that her remembering could feel non-stop, uncontrollable, and automatic. Give her a date, and she could often identify the day of the week and describe what she was doing around that time. The researchers proposed the term hyperthymesia syndrome. Later research adopted the term highly superior autobiographical memory. There is an important distinction here. A person with HSAM is not necessarily a human version of a search engine. You might assume that if someone can remember decades of personal experiences, they must also be amazing at memorizing phone numbers, random words, textbooks, or long strings of digits. That is not what the research shows. And this is where HSAM becomes much more interesting. In a 2012 study, LePort and colleagues examined 11 people with HSAM. The participants performed exceptionally well when researchers tested autobiographical memories and their associated dates. But on many standard laboratory memory tests, their performance was much closer to ordinary participants. In other words, the extraordinary ability was highly specific. It was especially powerful for remembering personal experiences. Think about the difference. You might forget what you ate for lunch last Tuesday. A person with HSAM may be able to tell you. You might remember that a family trip happened sometime during the summer. A person with HSAM may remember the exact date and connect it with other events from that period. Your memories are normally scattered across your life. For someone with HSAM, the personal timeline can remain unusually detailed. But there is an important question. How does the brain do this? The honest answer is that science does not yet have one complete explanation. Researchers have found differences in some brain structures among people with HSAM, including structures involved in memory and emotional processing. But a brain difference does not automatically mean that scientists have discovered the cause. It may be part of the explanation. It may be a consequence of repeatedly retrieving autobiographical memories, or it may be connected to another underlying factor. That distinction matters. Because HSAM is not simply a single switch inside your brain labeled perfect memory. Memory is a network. Your hippocampus plays a major role in forming and retrieving episodic memories. Your amygdala helps process emotional significance. Other brain regions help organize information about time, place, meaning, and personal identity. Your memories are not stored like videos inside a hard drive. They are reconstructed when you remember. And this leads to the most surprising part of HSAM. Even extraordinary memory can still be wrong. In 2013, Lawrence Patihis, Stephen Frenda, Aurora LePort, Nicole Peterson, and colleagues tested people with HSAM to see whether their memories could be distorted. The researchers used several established false memory experiments. The result was fascinating. HSAM participants were not immune to false memories. They could remember enormous amounts of personal information with remarkable accuracy, but they could still be influenced by misleading information and memory distortions. That sounds contradictory. How can someone have an extraordinary memory and still create false memories? Because remembering is not the same as replaying a recording. Every time you remember something, your brain reconstructs it. Pieces of information are brought together. Context is added. Associations are activated. And sometimes the reconstruction contains an error. HSAM appears to strengthen some aspects of autobiographical remembering without turning the entire memory system into a perfect recording device. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about hyperthymesia. It does not mean that every memory is perfectly accurate. It means that autobiographical remembering can be extraordinarily strong. And there is another strange detail. A person with HSAM does not necessarily control when these memories appear. Imagine looking at today's date. For you, it is just today's date. For someone with HSAM, that same date might automatically connect to several moments from previous years. A birthday, a conversation, a school event, a family problem, a completely ordinary afternoon. The past can become connected to the present without being deliberately summoned. That sounds like a superpower. But what if it becomes exhausting? The original case of AJ suggested exactly that possibility. Her memories were described as persistent and difficult to control, so the question changes. Would perfect recall actually make life easier? Maybe not. Forgetting has a purpose. Your brain does not preserve every moment of your life with equal strength. You forget thousands of ordinary details. You lose pieces of conversations. You stop remembering exactly what you were thinking on a random afternoon 5 years ago, and that filtering may help you focus on the present. Imagine carrying an enormous searchable archive of your personal experiences everywhere you go. A smell could remind you of a childhood location. A date could trigger an event from 10 years earlier. A song could bring back a very specific day. And an emotional event could remain unusually vivid. That could be fascinating. It could also be difficult. There is another misconception worth correcting. HSAM does not mean that someone remembers everything. The ability is primarily about autobiographical memory. You can still have ordinary limitations in other types of memory. You can still struggle with random information. You can still forget names. You can still have difficulty learning something new. You can still make mistakes. This is why researchers distinguish HSAM from traditional memory champions. Memory champions often use deliberate strategies. They may convert information into images, locations, patterns, or other mental systems. HSAM appears different. The autobiographical memories can be retrieved without the same kind of deliberate mnemonic training. That difference tells you something important about the human brain. Memory is not one ability. It is a collection of systems working together. You have working memory, semantic memory for facts and knowledge, procedural memory for skills, episodic memory for events, and autobiographical memory for the story of your own life. HSAM gives researchers an unusual opportunity to study that last system. It raises a deeper question about identity. How much of your sense of self comes from remembering your own past? Your childhood memories help define who you think you are. Your failures become lessons. Your happiest moments become part of your identity. Your painful experiences become part of your personal story. If your autobiographical memory becomes unusually detailed, does your sense of self also become unusually connected to the past? Researchers are still investigating questions like this, and one study cannot answer all of them. The science of HSAM is still relatively young. The first widely studied case was published in 2006. Later studies identified more individuals and began examining their brains, cognition, emotional processing, and susceptibility to memory distortion. More recent research has also suggested that people with HSAM are not simply superior at every form of cognition. Their extraordinary ability appears to be much more specific. That specificity may actually be the most fascinating part, because it tells you something about your own memory. You probably think of memory as one giant storage system. It is not. Your brain decides what becomes important. It connects events to emotions. It links places with experiences. It organizes your personal history into a story. And sometimes, for reasons that scientists are still trying to understand, that autobiographical system becomes extraordinarily powerful. But even then, the brain remains human. It can still reconstruct. It can still distort. It can still forget. And that is the paradox of HSAM. The person who can remember thousands of days from their life may still be vulnerable to the same basic imperfections that affect your memory. So the next time you forget what you did last Tuesday, do not immediately assume that your memory is broken. Forgetting is part of how the system works. Your brain was never designed to preserve every moment equally. It was designed to build a useful story from the moments that matter. And HSAM gives you a rare glimpse of what happens when that personal story refuses to fade. For most people, the past slowly becomes a blur. For someone with HSAM, the blur can become a calendar. But even that calendar is still being reconstructed by a human brain.